Hello everybody, my name is A Very Critical Brit and welcome to a critique of Fantastic Beasts, The Crimes of Grindelwald. This is the third and last part of this analysis. I recommend you watch part 1 and 2 for the context for the film and my arguments, as this will be the concluding section with an inevitable addendum at the end. With that out of the way, welcome back, we'll continue where we left off. So, Newt and Tina had broken into the Ministry using Polyjuice Potion with Newt disguised as Theseus. However, Theseus sees them and chases after them both. He fires a curse which levitates some postal cases, but Tina fights back and he is sent into a different room or tied up to a chair. They both laugh and continue through to the records room. Anyway, Jacob walks through a Paris street looking for the Lestrange tomb to reunite with Queenie. He enters a library, however he's stopped by a man pointing a wand at him. I don't know how big Rowling thinks Paris is, but for Jacob to find the tomb just, let's say, an hour after he left is pretty lucky. Speaking of which, let's not forget that this has all taken place pretty much within 1 or 2 days. The timeline of this film is pretty confusing, but if I've got it right, Grindelwald escaped 3 months prior to this. Newt's hearing and Queenie and Jacob's reintroduction is in 1 day, and then the illegal portkey through to now has all been in 1. However, judging by the different times of day, like night, afternoon, dusk, etc., it looks to take place over the course of a few days. Queenie and Jacob's reintroduction takes place at night time, and then Newt and Jacob get to the illegal portkey the next day. Did they not apparate? Did they drive? Because they both seem to be in a rush to get to France, so why would they take such a slow mode of transportation? It's the same for later on. Newt and Jacob get to Comet in the afternoon and then they get to his sewer home by dusk. And then, when they all break out in Newt Tames' Zouwu, it's night. But when they get to Flamel's safe house, it once again looks to be in the afternoon, evening at the latest. This is something that hasn't really been brought up in the powers and powers of reviews and video essays on this film, the fact that the daylight cycle is clearly wrong. Perhaps it was just a mistake. Perhaps we're looking at these scenes in a wrong order, so any scene with Grindelwald is actually just after he escaped from Makusa custody. Or, the filmmakers wanted their scene to have a specific tone but didn't stop to think about whether the look of the scene would override logic. I'm not saying that this breaks the film in any way, it's just a small detail I noticed. You'll never have someone unironically tell you that a piece of media is bad due to there being too much detail. Why do you think The Prestige is such an immaculately crafted screenplay? The attention to detail in that film is extraordinary and you can spend hours analysing each detail. What about Lord of the Rings, which boasts one of, if not the, best fictional worlds ever created? The detail and intricacy of Tolkien's world leaks into the script and making of the adaptations of his work. Whether through details on props or through offhand comments about certain places in the Shire, the world is alive and Middle-earth is there. But what about something like The Hobbit, yet another adaptation of Tolkien's work by Peter Jackson? The issue with this section of this scene is that the music playing is that of the Nazgul, not just of an epic march for our heroes. This makes the scene cool, but, like most of the decisions made in the Hobbit trilogy, surface level and meaningless. Let's take it back to Crimes of Grindelwald, shall we? Fantastic Beasts scatters references to the original series throughout, even making entire characters out of nostalgia bait and rewriting the lore to make the fandom clap. But the more you think about them and the more frequent they become, the less and less enticing the film becomes until you're just left with nothing but bait. The Lord of the Rings brings a unique and interesting iteration of Middle-earth, so vivid that you'll struggle to imagine Helm's Deep without thinking of how it is depicted in the films, or Minas Tirith, or Rivendell, or Mordor, the list goes on. Fantastic Beasts attempts to recontextualize certain characters to the point of them becoming ruined if you choose to acknowledge the new lore Rowling has brought to the table. Ah look, it's Nagini. Ah look, it's Hogwarts. It's the Mirror of Erised. It's Professor McGonagall. It's the Boggarts. Ah look, it's the Nazgul theme. It's Legolas. It's Saruman. Nostalgia bait in modern media has become a plague, slowly eating away at the original source material until it becomes dry of content, and then it just moves on to its next target.
I'll be back. Stay here. I'll be back. She'll be back. I'm back.
I'll be back.
I'll be back.
What?
I'll be back.
Kira, you and I will be working much more closely from now on.
Without a doubt you will get a remake of Lord of the Rings, a remake of Harry Potter, a remake of Star Wars and a remake of Terminator, and that is a fact we would have to face beginning with The Crimes of Grindelwald. Anyway, now we're with Newt and Tina and they're attempting to enter the French Ministry records room. To get through the security, Newt says Tina is Leta and Tina finishes off his sentence by saying Newt is her fiancé. Why would neither of them consider the fact that the French Ministry knows who Leta is and who her fiancé is? Not only do they work with the Ministry in high positions, they are also in this city and in this building. Why wouldn't they know that Newt and Tina aren't Leta and Theseus? Bouncing off of this point, why is it that Newt isn't recognized? Newt should be world famous at this point due to his involvement in the first film, or, at the very least, infamous within the ministries across the world. Speaking of which, does the ministry know that Newt has escaped the country or not? Are they monitoring him like how Theseus said and like how we saw when Newt left from his hearing? Because if so, then he should be heavily wanted, like how all of the posters change to his face when he and Tina are being chased by Theseus. In fact, surely the receptionist should know that he's Newt because of the wanted posters. Are there none of them in this section of the building? Why wouldn't they be if they had a function to turn into a wanted criminal that has been spotted within the vicinity? So the position we're in now means that there is no feasible way that they can both get through this security with that lie. Either the French ministry should know that Tina isn't Leta and Newt isn't Theseus, or Newt should be infamous enough within the world government so that he would be instantly recognized, or at least recognized by the receptionist due to a wanted poster of him just being shown. The writers have written themselves into a corner, and instead of trying to find an intelligent way to get out of it which fits within the narrative and world, they just ignore it and hoped you would forget about this. Regardless, the receptionist lets them both through. They go down to the records room and Tina tries to find the Lestrange record by calling out the name, yet nothing happens, so they walk along to try and find it. As they walk, they both talk about the piece of fake news that said that Newt and Leta are engaged. Tina tries to congratulate him, however Newt tells her not to and then explains that they aren't actually engaged and that Theseus is the one marrying Leta. This is the conclusion of the subplot that reunites these two people and forms their relationship yet again, and as this is the end of it, we can now look back. This was a pitiful excuse for a plotline to attempt to get our characters back together. Of all the ways to try and set Newt and Tina on a path to a relationship, this was the one that they went for, and it is pathetic and should be ridiculed much more than it already is. I'm not asking for a completely perfect script. I'm not asking for completely flawless motivation. I'm not asking for pristine characters. I'm asking for character motivation and progression through something that doesn't just invent character traits for it to exist. Like I said in part 1, Tina wasn't the one to read a gossip magazine. She wasn't the one to believe one piece of news instead of talking to Newt about it. And this is ignoring the fact that our characters are motivated by a piece of gossip news. Of all the reasons to have the chess pieces in play, a gossip magazine is not the way to do so. The drama presented in this story, whether you were connected to it or not, has high stakes. This is a time of war, and many people are in the crossfire, and for someone like Tina, it is a very dangerous time. Why not exploit her established position, career, and history with Grindelwald to thrust these characters to where you want them to be? She could be captured by Grindelwald to lure Queenie in so he can turn her, as well as Newt, as he needs him to get to Credence. We could skip over Karma capturing her, removing that inconsistency while possibly adding more to Tina. Perhaps she now thinks that she needs to be stronger and puts that above all else, not thinking about what it might cost. Queenie could see this, and that could just be the tip of the scale, with everything Grindelwald has said to her up until this point, and now her seeing Tina as a much more aggressive and reckless person than the sister she grew up with. She goes to Grindelwald, fulfilling her turn. This also gives us room to develop Newt and Tina's relationship over the course of the next few films, instead of leaving us with almost nothing to work with. I'll of course go over this in the conclusion, but where is their relationship at the end of this film? It's not on the level of The Incredibles 2, which retcons character beats and progressions only to redo it all because they have nothing for the characters to do. There's more to develop with these two, it's just not very engaging. Anyway, Leta enters the records room at that moment to try and find her. It's pretty unlucky that she came in at that moment, but I digress. She calls out for her record shelf and, trying to hide from her, Newt and Tina grab hold of it to hide behind. Once again, it's pretty unlucky that they chose the only shelf to grab onto, which was Leta's, so grabbing onto it was the worst thing they could have done, but I digress. Leta reaches out and reads a piece of parchment that tells her that the family tree book she was looking for has been moved to the tomb. She looks back up to see Pickett hiding on the shelf and turns it to see Newt and Tina. Why would Newt not have Pickett in his pocket? That guy's been in there for pretty much the entire film, yet the moment they need him to be in his pocket, he isn't. In fact, let me use this to go into yet another tangent. What's become extremely apparent at this stage is that Newt coincidentally brings things that help him, despite not knowing the situation he would be in. What purpose has Pickett served in this plot except picking the lock in Karma's sewer place and making Leta aware of their presence? Let me reword this question. What purpose would Newt have to bring Pickett? Newt had no idea the situation he would be in, so why would he bring along Pickett? What use would a bow trucker have when you are possibly encountering one of the most powerful and dangerous wizards at this time. Regardless, Newt, Tina and Leta are united, but at that moment the receptionist enters the room with a pack of Matagots. Leta points her wand at the pack as Newt explains what Matagots actually are.
These aren't cats, they're Matago, they're spirit familiars. They guard the ministry, but they won't hurt you unless you... Unless you attack them.
The Matagots being used as a security force is so stupid that it has been ridiculed to death since the film's release. But before we get into how ridiculous it is that they'd use animals that only attack when attacked, let's break down what comes before it. Newt decides not to explain that the Matagots only attack you if you attack them first, despite Leta pointing her wand at them, clearly in a panicked mood and about to fire a spell. For some reason, Newt decides to explain the fact that the Matagots guard the ministry as if that needed explaining. But the broader issue here is the fact that these animals are used and trusted as a security force for the records room. What if someone doesn't attack them and just continues on with what they're doing? As Newt says, they won't hurt you unless you attack them, so the French ministry security are betting that people become so panic-stricken that they decide to make the first move instead of just threatening them, or that someone doesn't know what these animals actually are. The security relies on all these variables to work, and we are meant to accept this. This is the bottom of the barrel of writing. Why not just use wizards and witches? Why bother taming Matagots and hoping people don't know what they are and will attack them when you have an arsenal of heavily trained and expendable people? This is the beginning of the third act and it is a disaster. This is already on the level of a nonsensical scene where Grindelwald escapes the Makusa and we aren't even at the ridiculous twist ending or at Grindelwald's rally yet. Anyway, Newt, Tina and Leta run from the Matagots and hide in the case. The Matagots surround them, but the Zouwu jumps out with the trio riding on top of it. Something that I've been noticing a lot throughout this film and part of the last is that the case is really inconsistent with what it actually, is. Is it a zoo, or can you open it from a specific enclosure to let animals out? How come the Zouwu can go through Newt's workshop, up the ladder and out of the case, let alone in the short amount of time it takes to do so? Regardless, the Zouwu jumps out of the ministry, taking a few of the Matagots with them. They land outside of the Lestrange tomb and it is a major coincidence that they just happen to end up here. The writers had no idea how to get Newt, Tina and Leta to the tomb, so they just made the Zouwu go there, without the Zouwu being instructed or even knowing that the plot is circling around this area. What do you do if your characters are at one place but you need them to be in another? Do you narrow down how long the journey should take to get them there? Do you just allow them to move around a majorly populated city without being caught or seen? Do you just have an army of ships appear on a planet's surface despite it being established that the planet is hard to navigate to? Or do you use an established power held by most characters in the world that can instantaneously get the characters to where they wish to be? I propose a rewrite that has its own Newt, Tina and Leta operate from the ministry instead of having the Zouwu luckily land where they need it to be, despite none of them knowing that the Lestrange tomb is where Credence is. It isn't perfect, the French ministry should surely have enchantments in place to stop people operating in and out of the building, but it is better than this, and that's the thing you've probably noticed with these rewrites that I've put forth in this series so far. I can't fix a lot of these issues and make them near flawless, but I can make them work better than they did originally. Them operating out at least gives us leeway to make it so Leta was the one who operated them, making their arrival at the tomb much more plausible. Then we can start the third act and its reveals with less of a contrivance. But what a way to start the third act of your film, and what a complete mess of a scene. It's almost fitting that the start of the final act begins with the ministry being enormously incompetent, and an unbelievable contrivance that drags our characters to where they need to be. Anyway, Newt puts the Zouwu back in the briefcase with the help of Tina as Leta runs away into the tomb.
The appeal of moving beyond the UK is twofold. Firstly, for the sheer sensory pleasure of looking at wizards in different cities, habitats. It's so visually interesting to mix up the architecture and the flora and fauna of different continents. So yes, there are definitely places that I would like to go. It's very freeing not to be stuck in a school. So on a very prosaic level, of course, it's so much fun to press on into different places and look at wizards and witches there. But also it really serves our plot because with the Potter movies, even though one had the sense that Voldemort was a threat to the whole wizarding world, you never saw how it was affecting people in the rest of the world. Well, this time I wanted to look at a world war, a world uprising, and actually go see that, not just stay with one character in the UK and see what's happening. So you want to do new things, you want to do it differently.
As Leta enters the tomb, she sees Karma pointing his wand at Nagini, trying to get a clear shot on Credence, with Jacob backed into the wall. She points her wand at him and tells him to stop, and he turns to look at her. He reveals that they are siblings, and when Credence says he just wants to know who he is and then Karma can kill him, Karma says that his story is their story and begins to go into a huge exposition dump. For the sake of clarity and so that we can look at this more in depth, I'm going to go through everything Karma and Leta go through and then talk about it after the fact. If you've seen the scene, you will know how stopping midway through can be a bit difficult. I also advise that you watch this scene before this analysis, as I will be going through it as if it were a summary. To understand who I'm talking about and the full extent of the story, you should probably watch the original scene first. So, Yusuf's father was Mustafa Karma, a pureblood, as well as his mother, Lorena. Corvus Lestrange fell in love with Lorena and used the Imperious Curse on her to seduce and abduct her. Lorena dies, giving birth to Leta, and with her death, Mustafa makes Yusuf take an unbreakable vow to kill whomever Corvus loves most. Yusuf thought the task would be easy, seeing as it seemed Corvus only loved one person, Leta. However, he realized soon enough that he didn't really love her. Corvus remarried 3 months after Lorena's death, and his wife gave birth to yet another baby, Corvus Lestrange Jr. That was when Yusuf knew who Corvus Sr. loved most. Credence finally asks whether or not he is Corvus Lestrange Jr., and while Yusuf says yes, Leta answers with no, so Yusuf continues his story. Corvus Sr. realized Mustafa had made Yusuf take an unbreakable vow to kill whoever he loved most, so he sent Leta and his new child on a boat to America with Irma Dugard. Irma had nearly no magic, so Karma couldn't trace where Corvus Sr. had sent them, but just as he found out their means of escape, he received unexpected news that their ship sank, yet Leta and Corvus Jr. survived. Yusuf points his wand at Credence and tells him that he has his pity, yet he must die. Just as Yusuf is about to curse Credence, Leta speaks out and says that Corvus Lestrange is already dead and that she is the one responsible for his death. She uses the Accio charm to summon a box towards where she stands. It lands at her feet and, with a few clicks, it opens to reveal the Lestrange family tree. She explains that the Lestrange family had an odd way of recording their history, as it only recorded the men and the women were recorded as beautiful flowers. She tells them that her father, Corvus Sr., sent her and Corvus Jr. to America. We see baby Corvus crying in his crib while Leta tries to sleep below him. People are running around outside their cabin and Irma goes out to investigate. Leta takes baby Corvus out of their cabin and replaces him with another sleeping baby. This baby is Credence. Irma runs back to them both and takes the baby Credence and Leta by the hand. They board lifeboats to escape the sinking ship, and she watches as the lifeboat with Corvus and Credence's mother sinks. Leta dives in to try and save Corvus, yet she cannot make it to him, and the last thing she sees is the baby floating down into the depths of the ocean, the white cloth he wears waving in the water. We cut back to the tomb as the symbol for Corvus withers and dies on the family tree. Newt tells Leta that she didn't mean to do it, so it isn't her fault, and Leta looks back at him and says he's never met a monster he couldn't love. Tina asks Leta if she knew who the baby Credence was when she swapped him with Corvus, and she answers by saying she did not. And so, with this plotline fully realised and explained, we can finally go back and break down what's wrong with it. This section of the film has been highlighted repeatedly as an unnecessary twist reveal, and it is pretty funny when you actually think about it. I mean, what was actually accomplished by this twist reveal? The scene is 3 minutes of Yusuf saying Credence is Corvus Lestrange, and then Leta explains that he isn't, and that she doesn't know who Credence actually is. Nothing has been accomplished here. We've just narrowed down who Credence could be by one family out of the hundreds in the magical communities. One of the characters encountered his aunt on a boat when they were about 8 or 9. Why did the Lestranges record the women in the family as flowers? I mean, if we go for a hypothetical here, then what about a modern day Lestrange who is non-binary? It just seems like a completely pointless addition that makes it more complicated if anything. What's with Newt saying Leta didn't mean to be responsible for Corvus's death, so therefore it isn't her fault? That isn't how blame works, Newt. What are you talking about? But the most infuriating thing about this reveal, other than the fact that we've been building up for this for nearly 2 hours only for it to accomplish nothing, is that Rowling's history as a writer goes against this. While, yes, the Harry Potter books are fantasy, they're really mystery stories disguised as such. Think about it, all of the books have had a mystery within. I've already talked about this, but it's melted into this narrative as well as the first film. But something went wrong here, and it's not hard to figure out what. It's pretty obvious that a lot of people were not as invested in this twist of events as the writers were hoping. Look at the twist for what it actually is for a second. Someone we've never met reveals that someone we've never met is not someone with little character, and that is the twist. For comparison's sake, how about we pick one of the vast plot twists Rowling has executed successfully in the past. The easiest pick is that of the Philosopher's Stone and the reveal that Snape is not trying to steal the stone, instead it's Quirrel. It's a fairly basic reveal and it isn't a special twist, but it works nonetheless. Throughout the narrative, the seeds are laid down for the reveal to be executed. Not completely obvious and obnoxious, but not subtle enough so that they are not seen at all. This of course leads up to the final fight where Quirrel is revealed as the antagonist and they fight, he is killed, and Voldemort is defeated yet again. Now let's come back to Crimes of Grindelwald. Corvus Lestrange is mentioned once in the conversation between Newt and Dumbledore. He is then forgotten for most of the film in place of other bigger plots, characters and action set pieces. Then we pick back up with the Lestrange plotline because the writers have remembered that was established, so we get this reveal and it means almost nothing. Yes, this is foreshadowed with Leta seeing the white cloth floating down like when she saw Corvus drowning as a baby, but there is jarring emotional disconnection that is impossible to ignore. I've yet to see anyone who is actually invested in this. Yes, there are people who care about who Credence is, me included, although not for the reasons most people are, but some part of the viewer's brain knows that this twist is ridiculous. They know that this doesn't have enough girth and satisfaction to it that fans who are actually interested in the mystery behind Credence's actual identity would want from this film. It's a shame because this really is the gateway into the next 3 installments. Like Rowling said, the first film was more self-contained and simple, whereas this one is much more complex, and the same will likely be true for Fantastic Beasts 3, 4 and 5. So, Crimes of Grindelwald had the job to welcome us into this new plot with Grindelwald, Dumbledore, Credence and this wizarding war, and the way they do this is by having a lackluster twist that gives nothing to us. This tangent probably wouldn't be so long had the script not built this up to be such a big event. I certainly put plenty of time into this film and this is the conclusion we're meant to form from it. Anyway, an entrance opens up beside them and they hear the rumbling of a crowd beneath them. They all go through the entrance and they end up in a vast arena filled with witches and wizards, all here to hear Grindelwald's speech. One of these is Queenie and Jacob spots her in one of the rows of seats. He approaches her and she is pleased to see him. She says she is sorry and that she shouldn't have forced him into marriage. He asks her if she knows that he loves her and she says she does, so he takes her hand and tries to leave the arena, yet Queenie says she at least wants to hear him speak first. As Grindelwald's supporters guard the exits to the arena, blocking anyone from leaving, Tina tells Newt that they need to get out of there. Newt tells her to try and find the others and that he'll think of a way to escape. Grindelwald comes out into the arena from a small hallway. As he walks, Tina is stopped by 2 of Grindelwald's henchmen and is forced to sit in one of the rows. The audience clap when they see Grindelwald and we focus on Newt, Queenie, Jacob, Tina, Credence and Nagini all looking anxious, surrounded by people who would kill them in a heartbeat. I actually think that this is executed pretty well. The suspension behind the rally beginning and the nervous looks on the characters' faces when they realize where they actually are is pretty well executed by the director and the actors. Grindelwald says that his supporters came to the arena because they have a knowledge that the old ways serve them no longer, and that they all want something different and new. He then says that people think he hates muggles, and that is not true.
It is said that I hate les noms magiques, the muggle, the no-mage, the can't spell.
This throwaway line has one main purpose, to expand the world, though not that much. However, I still have some stuff to say about it. Grindelwald lists off different names for muggles, the non-magiques, obviously the French version, the muggles, of course the more common and famous name, the no-mage, American slang for muggles, as was established in the first film, and then he says the can't spells, and I have to question what the hell a can't spell is, where did that even originate? Isn't a can't spell just like a dyslexic person? Anyway, Grindelwald explains that he doesn't hate muggles and he doesn't see them as lesser, more so other.
Oh, and what a world we would make for all of humanity, we who live for freedom, for truth, and for love.
This speech by Grindelwald serves an obvious purpose and we've been getting teasers of it throughout the script. It's to set him up being a villain who we can relate to and understand. While in the first film he's established to be more of a force to be reckoned with, someone who doesn't fully have understandable motivations and just wants to kill muggles and take down the Makusa regime, like an older Voldemort if you will. We'll see in a moment what Grindelwald's overarching plan is, and don't worry, we'll certainly discuss it in detail, but there's still a decent amount to talk about here. So, like I said, this is of course meant to be a way to sympathize and relate to Grindelwald, and it can make for a pretty interesting comparison between him and the more famous antagonist of this world, Voldemort. Voldemort wasn't a bad villain, in fact he's pretty good, but as for relatable motivation and sympathetic aspects to his character, he's pretty lacking. Rowling attempted to give reasoning as to why Voldemort is, you know, Voldemort, like when Harry and Dumbledore look into the pensieve to see the memories of those who encountered a younger Tom Riddle. He never experienced love due to growing up in an orphanage, and the fact that he was not born out of actual love, more so out of a love potion. It's actually pretty interesting that we just talked about a character who forced someone into marriage via a love potion or enchantment. But when we come to Grindelwald, it's a pretty different antagonist. Of course, this might all change when we come to Fantastic Beasts 3, 4 and 5, but I'll look at what we have at the moment with this film and the main series. Regardless of this scene, Grindelwald was bound to be a villain the writers wanted to be understandable due to the relationship between him and Dumbledore being set up. We're likely going to see the conclusion to this series with the duel between them both from Dumbledore's perspective, so of course there will be some form of sympathy directed at Grindelwald. The issue lies, however, when we look at what Grindelwald has done throughout this film and the last. The first scene in the first movie had him killing a group of Aurors. In this film, we begin with him killing a convoy of Aurors to escape custody. After escaping, he orders his men to murder a family of muggles, including an infant. This doesn't even go into the crimes we don't see Grindelwald commit before we begin the first film that are referenced in the newspapers on screen. How are we supposed to believe that people believe he doesn't hate muggles, and that he just sees them as different and of other use? And of course, how can we see Grindelwald as a more commiserating antagonist when we see him committing these actions? Rowling wanted us to feel this way about him regardless of how she got there. In the same way that she wanted certain characters in certain places, so she just put them there, she's done the same but with the antagonist of this series and his incentive. There are many examples of villains that we can engage with and understand the actions that they take and why they take them. Thanos is the most popular example of this. Over the course of Infinity War, we see Thanos committing to the murder of hundreds of people. We see him torture Nebula to try and force Gamora into giving him information about the Soul Stone. We see him fighting and killing characters we have grown to be attached to over the course of a decade. And we see him decimate half the world's population. However, with the information about his backstory given and why he's doing this, he isn't just a soulless antagonist, and we don't just see him as an enemy through and through. Another example of this would be almost every character in Game of Thrones. Part of the reason that series is so appealing to people is that it breaks the mold by having characters be protagonists and antagonists at the same time. The actions taken by the people we follow, even those who are deemed as good and noble, show that they aren't just that. Jon Snow hangs a child, Daenerys burns soldiers who refuse to bend the knee and accept her as the queen. Even characters who are nearly completely bad have moments that we can pity them.
I mean, I've often said that I believe in gray characters. I don't believe in black and white characters. I don't want to write the band of heroes on one side and the orcs on the other side. But that's not to say that that all characters are equally gray. You know, some are very dark gray, and some are mostly white, but they still have occasional flaws in them. You know, I've always been fascinated by human beings and all their complexity, and even human beings who do appalling things. You know, the question is why? Why do they do appalling things? And it's interesting to get inside their head and see why. You know, some of my viewpoint characters have done some incredibly reprehensible things. Theon, for example, or Victorian Greyjoy. Why? Why have they done those things? Were they just like born a monster? Weren't they born a cute little kid running around and saying, "Why is the sky blue, mommy?" and wanting to be loved and all that? We all start out that way, right? But things happen to us along the way that lead us to junctures in our life where we make decisions, and those decisions and the consequences of them color everything that comes after and colors the perception of the people. I think the struggle between good and evil is central to fantasy, and indeed in some ways central to most fiction. It's certainly a worthy subject for fiction. But where I think I differ is I regard the struggle between good and evil as being waged within the individual human heart. It's not waged as fantasy would have it, where a character called the Dark Lord gathers all the evil people together and puts them in black clothing, and they're evil because they're really ugly, and all the good people are handsome and they wear white and they meet on a big battlefield. In the real world, good and evil are not that complex. Very few people get up in the morning and say, oh, I'm evil. What evil can I do today? I'm going to cover the world with darkness and my legions of evil will rule all. That's silly. The greatest monsters of history, as we look back on them, thought they were the heroes of the story. That doesn't mean that it's all morally relative. That doesn't mean that all things are equally good and evil. I think there is good and there is evil in the world, but it's sometimes a struggle to tell one from the other and to make the right choices. And all of us, I've always been attracted to great characters. Maybe because that's what I see when I look around the real world, whether I read about it in history books or the news or just people I meet. I mean, all of us have it within ourselves to be heroes. All of us have it within ourselves to be villains. We've all done good things in our lives, and most of us have also done selfish things, cowardly things, things that we're ashamed of in later years. And to my mind, that's, I don't know, the glory of the human race. We're such wonderfully contradictory, mixed up creatures that we're endlessly fascinating to write about and read about.
A third and last example I could give would be that of the Terminator. In the first film, the T-800 is a non-stop killing machine, simply executing innocent people who mildly stand in his way. When we come to Terminator 2, a T-800 is sent back to protect a younger John, and over the course of that film we see how John and the Terminator begin to grow a bond, leading from fear of it to sadness over it dying.
I know now why you cry. But it's something I can never do.
All three of these examples achieve what they set out to do, make a perception we had over a character change drastically, some better than others, but I don't think there's a particularly bad one amongst them. However, it is interesting that I picked those three because they all experience changes in future installments in their respective franchises. Thanos goes from relatable to bland in Endgame after realizing there will always be those who fight back should he accomplish his balancing of the universe, so he decides to burn it down to atoms and rebuild a new world that will prosper under his rule. He wants to destroy the universe, but this is a complete change to the Thanos that we know from Infinity War, someone who wants to save every world, not destroy them. Is this change possible? Yes, of course, and it would work too if only it had more time to be fleshed out. In Game of Thrones Season 8, Daenerys goes on a genocidal rage against the people of King's Landing, flying her dragon Drogon, using his fire to burn those who flee below her. The writers came to this conclusion with her via a note left by George R. R. Martin dictating that is the end of her journey. But instead of actually building up to this, they just have her do it, despite her being established to hate the innocent being killed. The T-800 has never really recovered from Terminator 2. There is yet to be a film in the Terminator franchise that has had him as the antagonist since then. The threat that we felt when we first saw the laser pointer on Sarah Connor's forehead has been sapped completely, leaving nothing to be scared about. But the Terminator franchise has probably gotten it the worst out of all the reboots and remakes of old franchises so far. Coming back to Grindelwald though, the point should be clear. Just because you say he thinks muggles are equal and that he does not fight out of hate, it doesn't necessarily make it true, especially when we've seen nearly the complete opposite. And this is something those in the rally audience should know, and they should not believe him at all. While all this is happening, Aurors have entered the Lestrange tomb grounds. Theseus orders them that they should use minimal force and that it isn't illegal to listen to him. Inside, Grindelwald takes his skull vision vape thing and says it is time for him to share his vision of the future. He sucks in and blows out some of the smoke, and the auditorium is brought into a vision of World War II imagery. We see planes shooting at each other over ruined buildings, some Holocaust imagery, and it all ends with the blast of a nuclear bomb. Grindelwald explains that is what they are fighting against. He says that they are battling against the arrogance, the power lust, and the barbarity of muggles, and asks how long it will take for the weapons to be turned against them. First of all, if Grindelwald's vape can provide visions of the future, especially this detail-oriented, then why isn't this a much more popular object? Why don't the Ministry just use this to, I don't know, see whether or not Grindelwald is defeated, and if he is, just copy how he is and complete the task, and if he isn't, then that'll help you build defenses against any attack you could attempt. And of course, there's nearly every event that takes place in the main series where this could be extremely useful. What's even the point of divination lessons when this exists? But the bigger and broader issue is that we're now rooting for characters to stop someone whose aim is to prevent World War II and the amount of lives that were lost. We will now be rooting for characters characters trying to stop someone from stopping a world war. As an example of a protagonist trying to stop a villain from doing something good, a good citation would be Buffy the Vampire Slayer Season 2 Episode 7 titled Lie to Me. The episode follows Buffy as she reunites with an old friend from her school back in Los Angeles. Willow and Angel come together to try and research her friend, Ford, and learn that he isn't officially registered at the school. Ford goes to Spike and says that he'll give him Buffy should Spike turn him into a vampire. Spike agrees and Ford tells Buffy to come to a club with him. When they arrive, he tells her that they are all there to be turned into vampires after sunset, and they lock themselves in. When Buffy asks why, he explains that he has brain cancer and only has 6 months left. Being turned into a vampire is the only way he can survive. He tells her that the other people in the club won't be turned into vampires and that she pleads to let them go before Spike and his men arrive, but Ford refuses, saying that the doors can only be opened from outside. When the vampires arrive, Ford attacks her, but she overpowers him. She threatens to kill Drusilla and orders Spike to let all of the people in the club go. He agrees and they're all freed. She leaves them behind and locks the vampires in with the unconscious Ford. When Ford awakens, he demands that Spike hold up his end of the bargain as he brought Buffy to the club. Reluctantly, he does so. I think you can probably see why I've chosen this as an example of this type of antagonist done well. Both Grindelwald and Ford's aims are aims that have good intentions and will result in a good thing. With this in mind, however, the protagonists still need to try and stop them. They both try to achieve these aims through the suffering of others, however. With Grindelwald, it's the amount of people he'll hurt and kill to get what he needs. With Ford, he's willing to let a room full of people be murdered by what are essentially animals. The difference between these, other than the writing being good in Buffy and it being awful in Fantastic Beasts, is that Buffy deals with a completely fictitious event. Ford dying of cancer will of course be sad, but it isn't a real person. With Grindelwald, we're dealing with the deaths of millions in a real-world period of history. How about we change Grindelwald wanting to stop World War II to him wanting to stop a major wizarding war instead? It accomplishes nearly the same goal as giving him a reasonable aim which we can look at and think he's justified in doing. We can still have World War II-like imagery by having it be established to be a war between muggles and wizards and witches. This gives us a bit more of a reason as to why Grindelwald kills muggles. He sees it as if they're already at war. We could establish a much stronger relationship between him and Vinda Rosia, showing that he's compassionate and doesn't want her to be harmed in a future war. This can cause much more drama between Queenie and Jacob, and they don't know whether they want to continue fighting against Grindelwald or not. Wouldn't it be much more interesting to see a new take on the protagonist versus antagonist story in this series? They all have the same aim, but Newt, Dumbledore, Tina, Jacob, and the other characters left at the end of this film disagree with the methods Grindelwald is using to get there. But I guess we just have to follow characters trying to cause World War II to happen. Anyway, Grindelwald informs those at the rally that Aurors are with them and in the auditorium. The Aurors realize that they are heavily outnumbered, and I have to ask what they actually expected. They're going to an arena filled with Grindelwald supporters and they didn't think that they would be outnumbered? What was the plan here? Did they not realize that Grindelwald has a lot of supporters? The ministry officials at Newt's hearing say that his influence affects many, so surely they knew there wouldn't just be like 30 followers here. Grindelwald calls the Aurors to reveal themselves and they begin to walk down some of the stairs towards the stage. As he tells his supporters that they have killed many of his followers and that they tortured him in New York while he was in Makusa custody, a younger witch that we saw earlier when Grindelwald called his followers raises her wand and an aura instinctively kills her with the killing curse. If we ignore for a moment that he just used the killing curse without saying Avada Kedavra, thus making him more powerful than Voldemort, why is it that the gut instinct of a heavily trained aura who should be prepared for sudden hostile attacks is to just kill them? Why not use Expelliarmus, seeing as that's a spell that a second year can do pretty easily, let alone a grown adult who's on an extremely hard career path? Grindelwald approaches the dead supporter and tells surrounding followers to bring her body back to her family. He then addresses the entire crowd and tells them to leave the arena and spread the word about them not being the violent ones in this war. Although, I do have to wonder what the point of guarding the doors to the arena is when people can easily apparate in and out of it. Why did Newt need to think of a way for them to leave when he's been apparating to places throughout the film? Speaking of, what do these henchmen even do by blocking the entrances? We see them doing so, and then the Aurors are just inside anyway, so regardless of apparition, there was really no point in establishing the fact that the entrances are blocked. Once the audience have all apparated away, Grindelwald turns back to the Aurors. He casts a spell which causes blue flames to appear around the stage, stopping anyone but those loyal to him from entering. This could have been really helpful in the past, or the future. I'm talking about the main series, just bear with me here. Why not have this fire cast by the entrances to the Ministry when the Death Eaters were in charge? Would sure stop someone from breaking in. Why wouldn't the Department of Mysteries have this at their entrance, seeing as it's basically Area 51. You know how much confidential stuff is in there and you don't use this? Grindelwald sends flames around the arena, reaching Aurors trying to run away. Credence looks down to Grindelwald with Nagini trying to pull him back. He tells her that Grindelwald knows who he is, but Nagini says he doesn't, he only knows who he was born as. But Credence walks down towards the flames nonetheless. Jacob turns to Queenie and tells her that she needs to wake up, but she says that he's the answer to their troubles. Grindelwald will be the one who allows them to get married and legally be in love. Queenie goes down the stairs towards the stage and steps, going into the fire as Jacob and Tina look on, not being able to reach her. She crosses over and apparates away, presumably to some form of meeting point. How she knows where to go is beyond me, but we needed it to be more dramatic, so, you know, whatever. And now, with her arc throughout this film completed, we can now look back and analyze, or dissect, the actions taken by her and the writers to get here. The first place to start is right back to when we were introduced to her in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. She's established to be an upbeat type of person, although not without a few flaws. Sometimes she goes a little overboard with the mind reading and people would prefer to talk to her normally. Over the course of the film, she and Jacob fall in love, making Jacob being forced to lose his memory much more of a tragic event over just losing a friend. She's lost someone who was on the verge of being a romantic partner. They had a bond like no other. At the end of the film, Jacob has opened up a baker's shop using ideas left by Newt for cakes, clearly inspired by the magical beasts they both experienced. Queenie enters the shop and they both lock eyes, with them both smiling at each other, clearly meaning that there is room for more material for their relationship and implying that he hasn't entirely lost his memory of his friends. Cut to this film and it's a jarringly different character. She kidnapped and drugged Jacob and forced him into marriage, and it's implied that she wouldn't have released him until they had children. We've gone from an upbeat and innocent character to a complete sociopath in between one movie, and it's done completely off screen. She then runs from Jacob to Paris when Jacob almost calls her crazy, and the feelings we're meant to feel towards her are a bit confusing. In part 1, I took the stance that the writers intended the audience to feel pity on Queenie after being called crazy. However, with the full context of this arc at hand, it's possible I may have been wrong. No, I'm not. In all seriousness, my theory is that the intention was for us to feel sorry for Queenie when she's first called crazy after Jacob breaks free from the enchantment. Then, by the finale, the hope is that the scenes we've spent with her will justify her turn, and when Jacob calls her crazy yet again, we aren't meant to feel sorry for her, or at least not in the same way we are meant to be in the first instance. Now we come to Queenie's turn to Grindelwald, and there are a myriad of issues. It may seem justified on the surface level for her to turn towards Grindelwald for the reasons given. She wants to love who she wants to love, and Grindelwald seems like the way to get that goal. But surely it must be famous information that he's killed or ordered the deaths of many muggles in the past. The biggest reason the Ministry wants to stop him, other than the death of Aurors, is to try and prevent a war between the magical communities and the non-magical communities. She must have known from the way the rally crowd reacted to the mere mention of muggles that she is around bad company by joining him. She surely must realize that should Grindelwald win, those who follow him will make her marriage to Jacob much harder to live with than it is under the laws presented. But the Queenie introduced in the first film wouldn't do this. She would clearly have issues with the Muggle relations law, but turning towards the most dangerous wizard who is infamous for killing muggles, not even sparing children, is ridiculous. She had a major role in taking Grindelwald down. She was part of the 4 people who exposed his role as Percival Graves and got him locked in prison. Why would she turn to him after one conversation? Queenie has been assassinated as a character, to say the least. She's joined with Grindelwald to try and change the law about marrying muggles, but doesn't realize that she's joining a larger group of people who will kill muggles without hesitation. She's willing to just leave Grindelwald alone in the arena with Newt, Jacob and Tina, with no idea what he'll do with them. Where the writers will go with Queenie in the next 3 films is something that interests me a lot. She'll no doubt get some form of redemption, but how they'll handle it is going to be quite entertaining to watch, with how the writers have handled sympathy for characters doing bad things. Anyway, after Queenie joins Grindelwald and apparates away from the arena, Grindelwald turns his attention towards Newt and Theseus and shoots some of the blue flame towards them. They both raise their wands and cast protection charms against it. Curious how Newt has been able to stand against these flames when we've seen more than a dozen Aurors fall victim to it because they are unable to fight back. It's also pretty curious how all of the main characters aren't immediately killed by these flames, and instead either disappear off screen or they just kill people around them instead. As Theseus and Newt try to maintain a shield charm against the flames, Leta yells at Grindelwald to stop. The flames disappear as he turns to her. Grindelwald says he knows her, while Theseus tries to fight against the flames to make a path towards her. Grindelwald approaches her and tries to manipulate her.
Despised entirely amongst wizards, unloved, mistreated, yet brave. So very brave.
He really thinks that this will work as a way to make her join him when there are two people desperately trying to get to her to fight him. He tells her it's time to come home and reaches for her hand. She meets with it and he turns away to lead her through the flames, yet she does not follow. Leta raises her wand and points it at Grindelwald, trying to stun him. He deflects it and she fires another stunning spell at Vinda Rosier, knocking her back, causing her to drop the vision vape thing, which makes all the blue flames explode, filling the arena. There are a lot of issues, so let's take this one by one. First things first, how did that even happen? The flames came from a spell Grindelwald cast, not from the vape thing, so Rosier being knocked back and the vape being dropped should just cause the visions to be unavailable. Also, what was the point of stunning Rosier? If we just accept that her dropping the vape can cause the flames to go insane, then what was the point of that? Just made it more likely that Newt and Theseus would be killed in the same way you are. And then she just stands there gaping at Grindelwald instead of trying to take a shot at him. Yes, it is likely that you will die if you attempt that, but why wouldn't you try? Two people you love are in a room with him, an extremely powerful and dangerous man who just said that he will kill them and just tried to. This is obviously a suicide mission for her. She's just revealed that she is responsible for the death of Corvus Lestrange Jr., a secret that she has hidden but always remembered for her entire life. And now that she's viewed in a different light by the people she loves, she wants to take a stand and fight to the death. And so she does. Except she doesn't really fight, she just fires two spells and then gapes at Grindelwald as she is engulfed by the flames and killed. What a complete travesty of a character. Her only purpose was to try and set up a lackluster twist that proved nothing except it narrowed down who Credence was. But we've been over that, so what about a bigger issue? Because Leta died, the Lestrange family line is over. It's been shown that Leta and Corvus died, so how is Bellatrix, alive? What other Lestranges were there? I'll be honest, this is less of a plot hole and more of something that needs much more explaining. Although, knowing the state of the world building, I doubt we'll see anything of the sort. But if we bounce off of that point, what was the point in making Leta a Lestrange at all? Why make her be part of an established line, making the actions that she takes much more of a risk to the world building and plot? Other than fan service, there really was no point in having a Lestrange. Why not make a new family line that you can do whatever you want with so the world building doesn't get decimated like it nearly has been? Of course, there's a possibility that the next few installments will change this to make her a much more important character, but at this point, she's practically worthless. So, after Leta is killed by Grindelwald, Theseus is grabbed by Newt and they apparate out of the arena. Jacob apparates with Tina while Nagini is with Karma. As the blue flames begin to flood out of the arena, Grindelwald apparates away as well. Flamel appears at the entrance of the tomb and Newt, Theseus, Tina, Jacob, Karma and Nagini run towards him. He tells them to put their wands to the earth to cast a spell that will keep the flames that have now taken the form of 3 dragons within the tomb, or else all of Paris will be destroyed. And so they all form a circle and create an orange flame circle ring thing, which works to keep the dragons at bay. I mean sure, but what exactly is this spell and how did Flamel know it would work? For someone who hasn't seen combat in many years, he sure is quite skilled with a wand. But a bigger problem is why no one has ever used this. Yeah, I'm sure you've noticed that that's a lot of my criticisms of this film thus far, but this could have been helpful during the Battle of Hogwarts. Same for the blue fire dragon things. Why didn't any of the Death Eaters just use those to fight? Or did the spell just cease to exist once Grindelwald was imprisoned? But regardless, they all push the dragons back into the tomb and the entrances are sealed. I guess it's just stuck in there, or maybe they just closed the doors and it's already dead as a final nail in the coffin, so they decided to lock it in. However, surely this whole event will be a pretty famous one. As in, the followers and supporters of Grindelwald clearly think he just wants to do the right thing. Or at least that's what people who joined with him in this film think. But surely people like Queenie will know that he unleashed a near unstoppable fire dragon thing on the remaining people in the arena, including Jacob and Tina, and almost burned Paris down. Wouldn't doing this just cause more people to be against you rather than join you? Shouldn't you at least be trying to keep up the persona of someone who just wants to stop the muggles killing each other, even if that isn't actually what you want? So, what do you do after portraying yourself as someone who wants to do the right thing? You almost kill the people who have strong relationships with those who just joined you and try to destroy Paris, killing hundreds if not thousands of people. I mean, I'm sure we'll see some acknowledgement of this in the next few movies, right? I'm sure the writers aren't just going to ignore the consequences of this action just to skip right along to the next action scene, right? Anyway, Newt turns to Theseus and they hug each other. This is obviously meant to be a payoff to Newt's bad relationship with him and the fact that he doesn't hug him back after the hearing. If I could praise this film for a moment, I do really like the idea of Newt being the person who Leta really loves instead of Theseus. It creates a nice conflict between the three. Of course, it isn't quite fully executed or developed, so you don't quite feel the effect of it. Leta had the potential to be a really interesting and layered character that adds nuance not just to the Lestrange family, but also to Newt and Theseus. However, it's just implied and never developed enough. It almost feels like the writers were just trying to trick the audience into thinking she was a deep person, but she's just surface level. It's the same with Newt and Theseus' relationship, the same with Credence, Grindelwald, etc, etc, etc. They really wanted intriguing characters like those from the original series, but didn't want to put the work in. Anyway, Newt notices the Niffler limping towards him because it managed to survive, I suppose. Not only did it have to somehow escape the arena without any of Grindelwald's supporters noticing, it also managed to escape the whirlpool of blue flames and the blue dragons. But, you know, sure, we need to get the blood pact to the characters. Oh yeah, I didn't mention earlier that the Niffler managed to escape out of Newt's briefcase while they were in the arena and stole the blood pact from Grindelwald. It's pretty lucky how it decided to escape at that point when they needed it most and he was in a vulnerable enough position. It's also pretty lucky that it decided not to try and steal stuff from any of the other hundreds of Grindelwald supporters in the arena. It's pretty lucky that it noticed the blood pact and Grindelwald decided to bring it along with him instead of hiding it in his castle place, which he can clearly go to whenever he chooses to. It's pretty lucky Grindelwald didn't notice the Niffler crawling under his boot, which clearly should have caused him to at least look down at it. And it's pretty lucky that Newt decided to bring the Niffler, or they might just be in a pretty bad position at the moment. In the first film, didn't the Niffler constantly try and escape from Newt, but now it willingly returns to him? Does it really have enough intelligence to know that Newt would want the blood pact and that's why it came back? This is the last ditch effort the writers have made to try and make the Fantastic Beasts relevant in Fantastic Beasts 2. And it's a complete mess of writing. You would think it would work better than a lot of the other ideas introduced in the events that take place in this movie, however, not quite. I think a lot of people overlooked this smaller thing because it's just that, a smaller thing. As in, it's right at the end, and with the conclusion occurring so quickly, it's pretty easy to miss. But, like with this analysis thus far, we can break it down piece by piece. For the sake of this video not being a mess and for the chapters to work right, I'll be covering all of the Dumbledore scenes at the end in one and then move on to Grindelwald, unlike in the films where it flicks between them. So, Newt, Tina, Jacob, Theseus, Nagini, Karma, Travers and other Aurors are at the Hogwarts Bridge. I guess they apparated there, but I've already covered how that's not really possible, but also, how can Jacob actually be here? In Philosopher's Stone, it's explained that the castle just looks like a complete ruin to non-magical people, and Hermione also says there might be anti-muggle repellent charms over it, causing them to remember that they have a doctor's appointment or something similar when they get too near. But Jacob is just here with them. In fact, he's with Aurors. Do they seriously have no issue with his presence here? Do they not want to try and obliviate him, but this time with something that doesn't only get rid of bad memories? Or do they just accept that he's part of the story now, because where in the Ministry protocol does it say that a muggle doesn't need to be obliviated if they're involved in something? Wasn't Jacob involved in the takedown of Grindelwald, putting him in extreme danger? Why wouldn't they keep him in protection if they aren't going to wipe his memory? If Abernathy managed to infiltrate the Ministry to get into the position he was in while being a follower of Grindelwald, then surely it can happen again and again, leaving Jacob and the others in a vulnerable position. I think that could be a pretty interesting plot, but the Harry Potter series did get involved in the politics of the Ministry, it wasn't really that fleshed out. Voldemort did slowly infiltrate Death Eaters into powerful positions until they were ready for a complete takeover in Deathly Hallows. However, while that was interesting, it could have been much more politically intriguing. How did other countries' ministries react to this? Did they try to step in to help Britain out, or did they just ignore us? It was probably the latter if we're being honest. Seeing as the Fantastic Beasts series is seemingly going through different countries and their magical culture, what if America and Britain's ministries became infiltrated and fell? How would all these different magical governments react? This would make the world-travelling gist the series is setting up much more natural and important to the story other than it just being here and there, like in this film, and I, at the very least, would find it a much more interesting plot. That being said, I highly doubt it to head in that direction, but we'll see when we get to it. Dumbledore meets Newt on the bridge and asks if the rumours of Leta's death are true, and Newt says they are. It's interesting to me that Leta's death is well known enough for Dumbledore to know, and ask as if it is a common rumour. However, apparently the final battle isn't known about. It should surely cause people not to follow his cause, right? Who is there to spread the rumour? Newt? Theseus, the Aurors, I suppose, but the final battle made it look like it was only the main characters. I don't think it's in character for these people to cause rumours about Leta. And anyway, how would it have spread this far in such a small amount of time? Or did they only get to Britain after a week or so passes? And wait a second, Newt is with Aurors and him ignoring his travel ban isn't brought up at all? I guess he got pardoned because he was part of the group who stopped the blue fire dragons. Newt pulls the pact out of his coat pocket and shows Dumbledore it. Dumbledore takes it, and when he asks how Newt managed to get it from Grindelwald, Newt shows him the Niffler. Newt says that Grindelwald seems to underestimate simple things, which is a thing, I guess. I don't think he underestimated the creature he used during his escape from the Makusa. Pretty sure he put it in the position to occupy Spielman while Abernathy tried to get the blood pact. And wait a minute, Grindelwald couldn't underestimate the Niffler because he didn't even know about it. He didn't realize it was there in the arena, so that doesn't make much sense either. Dumbledore raises his wrists to show the Aurors he had monitors, and Theseus gets rid of them with his wand. Newt asks if he is able to destroy the Pact, and he says he might be able to. They both turn and walk back to Hogwarts to go have tea or something. Where's Jacob gonna go? Is he just going to chill on the bridge while looking at Newt and Dumbledore outside some castle ruins? Next up in Numengard Castle, which is Grindelwald's base place in Austria, which is later turned into a prison to keep him in. Grindelwald and Queenie look at Credence through a door, and Grindelwald asks Queenie if he is still afraid of him, and Queenie says he doesn't know if he's chosen the correct side yet, and that Grindelwald needs to be gentle with him. This obviously sets up some of the conflict within Credence, with him not knowing whether he's with Grindelwald or not, which will either lead to his death or him turning towards Dumbledore in the final film. Grindelwald approaches Credence and we get this exchange.
I have a gift for you, my boy. You have suffered the most heinous of betrayals. Your brother seeks to destroy you.
After he gives Credence a wand to channel the power he has through the Obscurus, he tells him that his true name is Aurelius Dumbledore. This reveal has been held up as a pretty big plot hole. There wasn't an Aurelius Dumbledore, there was only Ariana and Aberforth. If I could counter it for a second, the obvious setup here is that Grindelwald is lying and is only saying this to try and have a weapon against Dumbledore, and this will likely be yet another twist over the course of the next 3 films. However, there is still the issue with the Phoenix coming to him, which apparently isn't just a Dumbledore family tradition. And also, how come Aurelius Dumbledore was never talked about? How come there are no written records of Credence at all? Whether he is or is not a Dumbledore, surely there should be some form of historic record of this reveal. Grindelwald leaves and Credence turns back to the large window he was looking out of. He raises the new wand he has and fires a spell through the window, shattering it, and out to the mountain opposite, causing part of the face to break away and fall down. Credence looks at the mountain, at last able to master his power, and this is where we conclude the film. What a complete disaster of a film. I believe Crimes of Grindelwald represents everything wrong with modern media, and I've said this back in part 1. The over-reliance on cool-looking action sequences, the complete waste of good actors and good CGI, and a completely lackluster story. The opening scene is a complete mess that destroys the world building, causes the Makusa to be incompetent beyond disbelief through the mode of transportation they choose and how they handle the hijacking. Newt's hearing is a waste of time that only introduces something that is never brought up again, despite there being multiple chances of the Ministry to arrest him. Jacob having his memories back not only destroys the ending of the first film, it also causes a myriad of other issues with how the memory potion works. Queenie is character assassinated throughout, and we're supposed to sympathize with her after she puts a love enchantment over Jacob. Credence surviving and him being completely fine makes no sense, and once again messes with the ending of Fantastic Beasts and where to find them. We never see the investigation does stuff ever again, even though it could be extremely useful in the main series. Grimson decides to kill Ermendugar in an extremely risky way, seeing as he's revealed to be working with Grindelwald, and Grindelwald needs Credence alive. Speaking of which, Grimson never appears in the film again. He doesn't come to the rally and just disappears. I guess he'll be back at some point. Use of Karma slumping over and fainting due to the water dragon parasite just at the right time for the characters to escape is one of the worst contrivances I've seen in a long time. Breaking into the French Ministry is extremely easy for Newt and Tina, especially seeing as Newt doesn't disguise himself past Theseus' face through Polyjuice Potion. The Zouwu manages to bring Newt, Tina and Leta right to where they need to be. The Lestrange reveal is a complete waste of time, and the final battle is a mess of action. The fan service delivered throughout is extremely jarring, with Nagini, Hogwarts, the Lestrange family and more being included when they could have been cut out or changed to be new characters or places. I fully believe this is the worst piece of Harry Potter content by a long shot, but I have the take that the main series is flawed in its world building and plot. It was never as bad as this, and I'm glad to see this is something most people agree with. Not always, but we'll get to that. The writers of Crimes of Grindelwald wanted to tell a grand, complex story that sets up 3 more installments while the audience is enthralled into this new take of the Harry Potter world. However, the opposite has occurred, and now more people are completely uncaring over how this story will continue and end. The potential for this film is hard to ignore and makes it all the more infuriating as a piece of art. We had Newt, who is introduced as a quirky zookeeper with interesting and creative magical beasts that expand the world and give us some interesting imagery, as well as potential action sequences. appearances. And now we have Newt in Crimes of Grindelwald, someone who has no place in this story and is only here to create some form of connection between this film and the last. We had Tina, an Auror who displayed intelligence and dexterity. She was a talented witch who could stand her ground against those who were much more powerful than her. It made for a nice relationship between her and Newt due to them being pretty different, and there were foundations for a relationship to be built upon. And then we have Tina in this film, and she's been severely downgraded. She acts completely out of character by reading gossip magazines and is overpowered by someone who isn't especially powerful, while she's been trained as a dark wizard catcher and has had a duel with Grindelwald. Queenie was established to be an upbeat person who, while sometimes overstepping the boundaries of some people with her ability to read minds, she always has the best intentions at heart. Here, she turns to Grindelwald, someone who has killed possibly up to 100 people, most of them muggles, and she's turning to him to try and have a relationship with a muggle. Jacob was a much more interesting idea, and to many, including myself, he was the character who most people preferred over the witches and wizards like Newt, Tina, and Queenie. It introduces the idea of what would happen if a muggle were involved in a magical event, and I think the first film began his story pretty well. In this, however, he stands in the background as the magical action occurs and only steps in and adds anything for comedic relief, or to try and reach Queenie because that's his entire motivation and character now. Queenie. Grindelwald is a tricky one. People weren't fans of him when he was revealed at the end of the previous film, however that was largely to do with the actor rather than the character. But having a series in this world follow the war against him when his history hasn't been explored as much as it could be sounds engaging. It all leads up to the famous duel between him and Dumbledore, and that's something fans have wanted to see since it was mentioned. It's an interesting part of the Harry Potter lore that could, and should, be explored with the potential it has. However, this isn't something that should be in a Fantastic Beasts film. As exciting as this could be, this should be a Dumbledore film or even a Grindelwald film, not a movie with the main character being Newt Scamander, a zoologist. Dumbledore had no place in this film. He was only here to try and set up the finale for his duel with Grindelwald, however here he does nothing. Credence should be fine or at least heavily weakened, but I guess he's fine. He's somehow managed to control the Obscurial and can use it at his will despite him not being able to control his power in the first film, and there not being any room for him to be able to train his power. Credence is the centerpiece for this series, with his identity being the mystery and all the characters trying to get to him and help him, and with this latest reveal, a lot of people have been turned off from the character. When it comes to the characters in this film, it's a travesty. So, thus far the plot is in tatters and not a single scene doesn't have an issue, whether major or minor. But, if I can, I'd like to actually celebrate some aspects of the film that work and stand out. The visual effects have remained pretty great from where to find them, and there isn't really an effect that doesn't look realistic. The beginning of Newt's hearing scene has Owls in the Ministry, but I've already talked about that in part 1. Eddie Redmayne, Dan Fogler, Catherine Waterstone, Ezra Miller, Jude Law, Johnny Depp, Zoe Kravitz, and Alison Sudol deliver good to great performances. Jude Law and Alison Sudol above the others. Jude Law clearly did some form of research on how Michael Gambon pronounces certain words to tie younger Dumbledore into older Dumbledore. When I have heavily criticized Queenie's actions throughout, Alison Sudol's acting for said actions do make me believe that it's actually, you know, Queenie, especially at Grindelwald's rally. James Newton Howard's score was particularly well made and gives something that's new and fresh while not relying on the nostalgic score by John Williams. The costume design is pretty good, although I don't understand how wizards and witches in the 1920s started wearing this style of clothing, but, you know, whatever. There are some really nice shots in this film, and visually speaking, it's stunning and stands out from the rest of the series. I hope you've noticed how none of my praises have been about the writing, other than the Ministry Owls, although that could have just been added in post. It's hard to imagine where they'll go from here. I seriously question how they'll manage to continue the story with the complete mess of Crimes of Grindelwald and the fandom turning against this series. It's almost universal that this film is bad and unnecessary, and with it doing badly in the box office, there's a high chance that we'll never get to see Fantastic Beasts 4 and 5. So far, this prequel series isn't off to a very good start. Production seems to be a bit of a mess on the third installment, and I cannot wait to cover that when it comes out. But that was Crimes of Grindelwald. In a way, the first film can pretty much be skipped with the exception of character introductions. While yes, characters are reintroduced, it isn't fully explained who they are. However, when it comes to the plot, Crimes of Grindelwald is the setup to the series moving on, while Where to Find Them was its own story, almost completely separate if not for Grindelwald at the end. It almost feels like a completely different series with the absence of the beasts and a complete tonal shift from the former film. Where to Find Them was a much lighter film, whereas with this it's one of the darkest Harry Potter films to date. And that carries over to the literal sense. The opening escape is so dark you can barely tell what's happening, although that may be a blessing in disguise. But I do hope you've enjoyed this analysis. so I've certainly enjoyed working on it. If you did like this critique, there is a decently long list of other videos I believe you will enjoy while I work on other videos that I'll talk about in a second. First and foremost, Mauler's critiques of Star Wars The Force Awakens and Star Wars The Last Jedi influenced this series greatly, and even inspired me to actually begin production on it. The same goes for his other videos, like his Unbridled Rages, Praises, and the podcast he runs called EFAP. It seriously helps out when it comes to forming critiques and arguments, as well as helping me improve these videos over the course of the series. Like I said in part 1, I've upgraded my editing software, so the quality should be noticeably high. Speaking of podcasts, Ecom is a smaller podcast inspired by EFAP, which has the same format, except with me making it much more entertaining. Now, I have quite a lot of other videos planned, and I won't go through them all here, just in case I decide for them to be cancelled or they get delayed so I can work on something else, but I will list a few off. The next video you can expect from me is a review of Jordan Peele's Us, because ever since I first viewed it I've wanted to break down all the issues presented in that script. There may also be a review of M. Night Shyamalan's Old, because I'm interested in his career and that film to say the least, although we'll just have to see how that turns out. The same goes for Marvel's Eternals, as well as that serving as a review for the current phase of the MCU, because there is an overload of plot holes so far and we're, 2 movies in? And you never know, I may also work on another critique series at some point. I want to thank Man of Tin for creating the thumbnails for this series. I've given credit in the descriptions for all 3 of these, but I feel obligated to thank him all the same. These thumbnails are genuinely amazing and I'm extremely thankful for his work. But yes, that was my critique of Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald. Thank you very much for watching this whole thing if you managed to get through it all. I've wanted to put this out since the film was released, but I only really planned to do it around September or October last year. Ideally, I would have liked these to be out relatively close to each other, but they take however long they take. And I think taking my time on these definitely improved their quality over rushing each part to try and release them sooner. Crimes of Grindelwald may very well be one of the worst pieces of modern mainstream content, and it is an objectively bad piece of content. While writing the scripts for this series, there were a load of issues I never fully realized were there until taking a closer look at the film, and I don't believe I even covered every single issue, just the bigger and broader ones. But it has all been said and done. I've completed the series and I can put The Crimes of Grindelwald to rest and move on with my channel. It was pretty exhausting to make this, however I hope my work has paid off. I'm actually surprised I've completed this series in all honesty. If you know me well, you'll know that I'm pretty good at starting things and then not completing them, but this has been an exception and I'm extremely glad about that. I probably wouldn't have completed this project had I not received support from the latter 2 parts. Thank you so much for watching. The growth this channel has received in views and subscribers is something I didn't expect at all, but I'm grateful all the same. Thank you for watching this part in this series. I will see you later with whatever content I choose to make next. Goodbye for now.
This news comes to us from THR, which reported Johnny Depp's departure from the Fantastic Beasts franchise. According to an unnamed insider from within Warner Bros. Magical property, J.K. Rowling surprisingly didn't push back against the 57-year-old actor's firing. Given her previous unabashed support of Depp, this is a surprising turn of events.